Welcome to Basics and Beginners, a video series in which I will explain the basics of Dungeons & Dragons to you and hopefully make the game easier to understand and more approachable to both beginners and more experienced players of the tabletop genre. This video will deal with making a character for your own D&D adventure. If you are a completely new player, this might seem horribly overwhelming at first, but it does not have to be, and I'm here to make this as simple for you as possible. Step 1. Ask yourself the following question. What character fantasy do you want to fulfill? Do you want to be a stalwart knight that never falters in the face of danger? Perhaps a shady rogue that sneaks through hidden passages and empties pockets? Or the stoic wizard slinging spells and summoning extraplanar beings? I've seen a lot of people copy characters from fiction, which is fine within certain limitations. Copying a character as they are from fiction rarely works out as you intend, and should you decide to go down that path for whatever reason, I recommend that you do not copy a character but simply draw inspiration from it. You break the character down to parts which you can then apply to D&D, which is something I'll do later in this video as an example to how you could apply a fictional character to D&D. Once you have your character fantasy figured out, we move on to step 2. At this point, you should get in touch with your DM to plan out how your character fits into the game story, why they are adventuring, and how they fit into the party. But what if you are the DM and one of your players approaches you for guidance? Assuming your player isn't sure what they want to play, present them with class options. The player will usually pick that which sounds the coolest for them or whatever resonates the most with their character fantasy, and then you can pick it up from there. Step 3. Now that you've figured out how you can apply a character to the game, with the help of your DM, hopefully, let's implement it. You have 3 main factors to consider when putting your character together. Those are your background, your class, and finally your race, in no particular order. These are all factors that will define but not make your character. First and foremost, your background, class, and race are just data on the character sheet, which is ideally somehow connected to your character to give them a fitting personality. The reverse is, however, also possible, in which you have a character figured out and then find fitting backgrounds, classes, or races to apply into them in-game. After you've done all this, your character is mechanically complete and ready to play. Although one final component is still missing. Step 4. Breathe life into your character. Come up with a short and brief backstory to explain how and why your character ended up adventuring and joining a party of other adventurers. This is, again, best worked out with your DM as well. You're probably noticing that I've mentioned this before and I insist on repeating myself here, simply because it is very important for you to have. A character with no reason to be adventuring has no motivation and therefore no drive to do anything in the game. That will be boring both for you and eventually your fellow players. Ideally, incorporate the 3 factors from earlier into this somehow. So perhaps you're a former corrupt guard captain that now seeks to hunt outlaws and uphold the law through divine will. Maybe you're an elven outcast that has traveled far to see more than just elven forests or cities. Maybe even the sage wizard wandering the lands in search of more powerful spells and knowledge. And now some general advice I have for you. Do not blindly follow an online build guide because it's supposedly highly efficient and whatnot. Following an optimized guide will only work if you fully understand how to utilize it, and it will most likely not help you understand the game better. Only multi-class if you're sure you know what you are doing. Multi-classing can be a great tool to optimize certain parts of your character, but are totally not required to have a decent or even efficient character. Your character is not entirely defined by their class. Playing a barbarian, for example, doesn't mean you have to be a bumbling buffoon that's always mad and angry at everything. In the same vein, low intelligence doesn't mean you have to talk like a caveman and don't understand basic math or simple concepts. Also, low charisma doesn't mean you're some ugly hag all the time, just to name a few examples. And lastly, do not get bogged down in the specifics when coming up with your own backstory. Keeping it vague will give your DM more to play with in the story. You could mention, for example, having left behind family before you start adventuring, and your DM could bring your family into the story then. Now, let us review what I have said in this video so far with an example. For the purpose of this, I've taken a very well-known character from popular fiction and will apply the idea of that character into D&D. For the record, I'll be working with the assumption that every official 5th edition book is allowed and available at your table. First off, Luke is a human, so we're going to pick that as his race. But since regular human is frankly kinda horrible, we're going to be using the variant human instead. This means we get to put 1 point in 2 attributes of our choice, as well as a free skill, And most importantly, a free feed just from my racials. Add one more language to pick that is not common. Next up is our background. For that I've decided to go with the folk hero background. Assuming our chosen character is the Luke Skywalker from Return of the Jedi, then it is very fitting. This gives us 2 more skills to assign wherever we want, 2 tool proficiencies, and some adventuring equipment. Finally, we have our class, which I've decided to be the fighter for 2 reasons. A fighter is a very simple class to play, and therefore very beginner friendly. And the Cyber subclass is in my opinion a perfect fit for the Jedi fantasy. An Oath of Devotion Paladin would arguably be a better fit for the whole aesthetic, but it is more complicated for newer players, but definitely not a bad choice. Now that we have our 3 factors figured out, let's assemble what we have. At first level, our Luke Skywalker lookalike would have the following stat distribution using standard array, just because it's easier to handle than other systems. We'll start off 10 strength, 16 dexterity, 14 constitution, 14 intelligence, 8 wisdom and 12 charisma. We have put the 2 points we got from a race into dexterity and intelligence to raise them higher so we don't end up with an ugly uneven stat. And for our feat I've chosen to go with lucky. Yes, there are potentially more optimal choices, but I feel like Luke is a particularly lucky character, even though a lot of his luck can be attributed to space wizardry. And lucky is honestly never a poor choice for any character. Lucky gives us 3 luck points to spend whenever we roll for an attack, ability check or saving throw to add another dice to the mix. And then we also get to pick which dice to use, and the cool thing about it is actually that you can use it after rolling the initial dice, but before the outcome is determined by the DM. So this could come in rather clutch and save a life, or land the shot that seals the fate of a planet-destroying space station. Now, we have 3 skills we can freely put anywhere we want, thanks to Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, and the customizing your origin optional rule. Alternatively, should that rule not be allowed at your table, we would get animal handling and survival from folk hero and any other skill from variant human. I'm purposely not given strict instructions where these skills should go, as these help define your character, and my guides will mostly focus on helping you create characters that mechanically work out. Usually, in this case, that means for combat. So assign skills where you would feel they are appropriate, but keep in mind stat modifiers. First level fighter will give us a fighting style, which will be dueling, giving us a +2 to damage rolls if we wield only one melee weapon in one hand and none in the other, and also second wind. For our stunning equipment, I recommend picking up leather armor, a rapier and a shield. Now you're probably wondering, hey, but Luke Skywalker didn't have a shield, and you are right, he did not. Not physically anyways. So let me introduce to you the power of flavoring, which I will have a video about as well. Instead of saying you're physically using a shield, this character will use one hand for their rapier, a fencing weapon much like the lightsaber, while the other hand remains mechanically occupied holding a shield. How do I explain the AC boost and thematic implications of wielding a shield, you say? This character will be using the force to deflect, redirect or even block blows. The shield is therefore simply a defensive application of the force. However, this is something that will have to be discussed with the DM. At second level, fighter grants us action surge, which lets us take an additional action once per rest. And at third level, we finally get our force powers when we take the Cyber Warrior subclass. This gives us the psionic powers feature, granting us telekinetic powers much like the force powers used in Star Wars. Initially, these powers run off a limited amount of d6 determined by our proficiency bonus times 2. At third level, that is just a meager for uses, but like most of the fighter resources, we get those back on the short rest, which is amazing. It also allows us to use 3 new fancy powers: Protect the Field, Psionic Strike, and Telekinetic Movement. Protect the Field lets us reduce any damage a creature within 30 feet of us takes by the number rolled plus our intelligence modifier, which means we can potentially shield ourselves and our allies. Psionic Strike lets us add additional damage once a turn in the same way we reduce damage with Protect the Field. Telekinetic Movement lets us move loose objects or a willing creature other than ourselves up to 30 feet. Honestly, this is a very situational power and does not have any inherent combat potential, as it also consumes our action. It does not mean it's useless, you just have to find a use for it. At this point, our playstyle revolves around engaging the enemy in close range and slapping them with our rapier, improving our damage with Psionic Strike, while also having the ability to shield our allies from some incoming damage. And that is basically how this will play out in combat as a fighter. Our damage will basically double at 5th level of extra attack, and then again at 11th level of extra attack too, Electric Boogaloo. At 4th level, we will get our first ability score improvement, which lets us improve any other attributes by 2, or if your DM permits it, taking a feat instead. In this case, I recommend either putting 2 points in dexterity to raise your AC as well as damage, or taking the defensive duelist feat, which lets you use your reaction to add your proficiency bonus to your AC if you attack with a melee weapon, while wielding a finesse weapon, which the rapier happens to be. I'm not going to take this pseudo guide further than 4th level since I don't want to swamp you with too much information right now, but this is basically how this build would play out. And some final words of advice: most games do not run all the way to the 20th levels, do not expect them to. That's it for making the character. Come and check out my other videos if you'd like, some of which are D&D related. You can also follow me on Twitch to see me and the boys play D&D live.